It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Sharyn Spitzer. We're here in Jerusalem, and Sharyn, you've been a patient and a friend for many, many years. And
25 years.
25 years, and you have an incredible story and a journey, and you've written this most amazing book called The Candelstick Trail. So if you can show our viewers this incredible book, which I highly recommend. And Sharyn, if you could let us into your journey, your life story.
Notice the candlesticks. The candlesticks are the survivors, the family that came from Europe. We have photos, we have paintings, which I have done. How many eyes can you see? In all of my artwork, you will see my eyes. My journey really, my personal journey began at the age 45, and there was an article in the Canadian Jewish News, and the question is, cornea transplant, what does it do? It opens the world to a person who would soon lose all their sight. And this article appeared in November 1991 in Montreal. There was a note left on the front steps of my house, which my son Aaron found when he came home from school. My older son, Joshua, happened to be at home when the telephone rang at 8:30 in the morning. He hadn't left yet to go to college or to go for his Hebrew exam. And so he answered the phone, and the doctor said, "Where's your mom? I need her to come to the hospital now, within an hour." And Joshua had no idea where I was. So he left a note that said, "Dear Aaron, don't panic. Mom went to the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal for her new eye. The doctor phoned this morning just after she left for school. Josh." So who's mom? I am mom, and I was 45 years old. I had come to the point where I had to admit that I could no longer see the big road signs when I was driving the car. The little ones I hadn't seen in many, many years. And so I had compensated by taking the car downtown, parking someplace, getting out, walking, and discovering that, okay, I needed to go 3 more blocks and make a right turn at the bank. I learned to give global instructions. When I was working in the Jewish Education Council in Montreal, people mentioned to me that I was reading like this. Well, that's just how I read. And that was with reading glasses and contact lenses. And so one morning I took myself from the university, where I was doing an intensive summer in French, to the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. And I walked in and I saw my wonderful doctor, and I said to him, "Help." We had been following my situation with keratoconus for about 12 years. So we knew that, the cornea was misshapen, and eventually I was going to need to have a transplant. And so I came in and I signed the papers, and I had to wait. And it took 6 months. Now today in Israel, it can take up to 2 years to get a cornea. And so who am I? I was the local Hebrew teacher, and I worked in the Jewish Education Council. And then I worked in the Israel consulate in Montreal, and a lot of people knew who I was. They knew me as the lady with the red jacket, because I would go to all the public events wearing a red jacket. I even had a red overcoat, so that people could recognize who I was, because I couldn't see them. I knew their voices, but I couldn't tell you which David was David. And so this is the beginning of my story. When I came home from the first operation, it was Friday, and it was Erev Hanukkah, and it was Erev Shabbat. And I, who had left the house mostly as a blind lady, was home, and I was actually capable of taking the match and bringing it to the Hanukkah to light the candles. And I was capable of lighting the Shabbos candles. Nes Gadol Karali. And so
a huge miracle.
Huge miracle. Huge miracle. And here I am to tell you and everybody else that you can give the gift of sight to another human being. And if it was a question of giving them your kidneys so that your daughter or your son would live, you would do it. Well, eyes are given by some unknown someone who unfortunately is just passed away, and the eye has to be transplanted, especially the cornea, as quickly as possible. And so the doctor said, come now. Well, fast forward to Jerusalem 35 years later, when I had a phone call from Dr. Landau at Hadassah in Ain Kara. And it was a morning, the end of August, and I had just moved the day before. So you can imagine the havoc all around me. And I have a husband with Alzheimer's, and he said, come now. So I told the neighbor next door I have to leave for the hospital, and here's the key in case you have to get in. When I came back, the young neighbors had set up my kitchen for me so that I would not have to lift or bend or do all the things that I was not supposed to do. Well, that particular cornea transplant was not successful. And my good doctor said to me in December, Dr. Landau says, you know, we're going to do this again. We are declaring it a gross failure. Now, only maybe 3% of all cornea transplants are not successful.
Was this on the other eye or the same eye that you had done?
Oh, well, I've had both eyes done. I've been under the knife, shall we say, 5 times. All right? 3 times on the left eye and twice on the right eye. And that was because the technology changed so much. And so therefore the question was, what do we do? You know what good sight I got back 35 years ago is not equivalent to the good sight I have today. Today, this eye does not have any correction at all. No eyeglasses, no contact lens. The right eye has a special contact lens, handmade for me. It's not one that you can order off a shelf. Now, when my good doctor declared this a total failure, It was the week of Hanukkah. And he said, well, I don't know how long it's going to take. If you're lucky, you'll get a surprise. But otherwise, it could be up to 2 years. Well, that was Sunday. Came Thursday, and it was raining, and it was freezing hail, and it started to snow, and my phone rang, and it was Dr. Landau saying, come now. Come right now to Hadassah. Leave everything. And so, with my Alzheimer patient, I had to get a ride, because I didn't have a car, and get from Givon HaYashana, where we were living, to Hadassah. By the time that we got to Hadassah, the road to Hadassah was already closed coming up from Tel Aviv. The weather had turned, and we had the greatest snowstorm of the century. So, luckily, I had taken a knapsack, and I brought sweatsuits and crackers and tea and instant soup, and we were trapped for 8 nights in the hospital because even the good doctor couldn't get through in his Jeep. So after he came the next day, he took me from the bed, took me by the hand, we walked down to the surgery, and 45 minutes later he said, well, I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll take off the bandage. Well, tomorrow didn't come. He didn't come for a whole week because of he couldn't get through with his Jeep. But luckily, the same doctor who was on call when I entered the hospital was still there when I left the hospital. And she examined me every day. She was there because she couldn't go home because of the weather. And just an aside to all of this, when you're in the hospital during such a storm, the hospital has to operate on special emergency systems. And so, yes, even though there was heat, it was cold and we wore sweatsuits and ski jackets. My husband had slept on a mattress on the floor. There was not normal meal service. They brought out emergency army rations from the freezer, and I guess maybe in a microwave or something or maybe in a gas oven, they were able to warm it. There was no laundry service. There was no cleaning service, nothing. Everything just stopped. The mall was closed. You couldn't buy coffee. You couldn't get a room in the hotel. It was closed. And this is part of the miracle of living in Jerusalem, that everybody pitched in. Even my Alzheimer patient pushed trays around to feed people. It was quite a story. Now, this is part of the Candelstick Trail, but my story begins in 1897 when my great-grandmother ran away from home. She didn't want the shidduch that her mother had arranged for her.
Where was she born?
She was born in a place, starts with an R, Rosa, something like that. RZSCA in Poland. And she left with a brother-in-law, and they headed to England. They thought they were going to London to look for her sister and his brother. Well, when they got to London, of course, they weren't there. And Hayas eventually sent them up to Leeds, where they found them. When she entered her sister's home, lo and behold, her poor sister was sick and dying. And she was all of 23 years old, and she had 4 babies in diapers. And this was not a time when you called your mother in Poland and said, "Mom, we've got trouble, come." So nobody was coming. And here was Basha, and she was 17. And the neighbor said, but you can't stay here in the house. This is open-ended. It's going to be forever. You have to take care of these babies. And so she had a boyfriend who had promised to come within 6 months. And by the time that he arrived, she was married and pregnant, because she had had to marry her brother-in-law in order to stay in his house and take care of his kids. And those children called her Mama to the end of their lives.
Mom. What happened to the sister? Did she pass away?
She passed away at age 23.
Only after she passed away did she get married?
Wait, after the sister passed away, then the younger sister, Basha, who had come all the way, so that she was running away from the shidduch, got stuck. She had to marry the brother-in-law in order to live in the house and care for the children, because in the Jewish community it was unheard of that a 17-year-old is going to come and live in the house forever. I mean, it's not like she was going to be able to leave after 6 months. You know, the babies, no washing machines, everything by hand. You had to make the bread by hand, the noodles by hand, all of these things. And in fact, I even have the rolling pin that Buba Basha got from her neighbors when she got married. And that boyfriend did come, and he came 3 times after her, in England and then again in Philadelphia twice. But in Philadelphia, she said, but you are married. She was a widow. And then the second time, she was married and he was a widower. And so they never got together. Well, the story is that the family was in England, and around 1910 the Zeta went to Philadelphia, and he took the oldest 2 children, Morris and Hattie. And he worked hard, and he sent money to buy tickets in the steerage for his wife to come with the other 3 children. And so they arrived to Philadelphia, where things were not so good, and they were very poor. And the uncle, A.B. Isaac, said, I won't help you financially. And he had a big car when nobody had a car. And he had no children, and he had a fur business in Philadelphia, and he was probably pretty wealthy. But he wouldn't help unless they gave him the children. Well, she wasn't giving up these children. They called her Mom. So she sent the boys to work on a farm. And in this farm, they were picking apples, but at least the farmer fed them. And she was an indentured servant, like any mitzapelet that we would find today, in somebody else's house. Eventually, when the boys came back, and as our story continues, there was the First World War, and then after the First World War, Buba, my great-grandmother, she had a surprise when her mother arrived in Philadelphia, unexpected.
From Poland?
From Poland. And my father and his cousins told me, this is about 10 years ago when I talked to them in Florida, he and his cousin Fufi said, you know, we couldn't talk to her. We didn't speak Yiddish, and she didn't know any English. And so they were little children. They were the oldest of the grandchildren. But they remembered that she had come, and she was there, and then she went on to Nashville, Tennessee, to live with her daughter, and also she had a son in Nashville, and so she lived the rest of her years there. Now, over the years, you know, the family wasn't wealthy, and in 1936, 36, in 26, Zeta, who was working at the Philadelphia Naval Yard, he was making the wheels for the trolley cars. And one morning, on the way to work, he was run over by one of these trolley cars, and he lost his legs. And so just below the knee, he had no leg. Now, it's not the time when you could go and buy a prosthesis, have it fitted. There were no such stores. No hospital provided this. And so he created his own wooden legs. Now, he would hook them up, and they moved to a house on Marston Street. And I remember that house. I can tell you where everything was in that house. And so they moved there around 1930, but there was steep steps to go upstairs. And the 3 bedrooms were upstairs. And there was no bathroom in the house, because how did they build in England? How did they build in Philadelphia? They were row houses. They had an outhouse. They had an old cellar with a dirt floor, and where the coal was deposited down the chute. And in that house, there was a terrible fire that happened on a Friday night when Boba Basha, here she is in 1979, when she was 99 years old, she had lit the Shabbat candles. Which candles? The same candlesticks we're talking about from here.
Those are the same candles?
The same candlesticks. She lit the candles, and they were on the window sill, or near the window, maybe on the table near the windowsill in the kitchen. And she went to her neighbor, like I do often, to have tea. And suddenly there was a big roar in the neighborhood, and because nobody had a telephone, there was a fire. And poor Zeta was upstairs in the bed without his legs, and there's no way for him to come down, and no way for anyone to go up, because the fire started in the kitchen. And so the neighbors got the fire department, and the fire department, they didn't know what to do, because it's a row house and there are no windows on the sides, and how to get in there. And they came through the neighbor's house, up the steps, broke a hole in the wall, and then went in and carried him out through this hole to the neighbor's house to get him out. Now after that, they made a bathroom upstairs. That bathroom, until my children were born, never had a sink. It had a bathtub, it had a toilet. And I remembered that I had to be down on my knees to brush my teeth in the bathtub. Now, this was the life of an immigrant family, but my grandfather and his brothers and sister didn't really grow up in that house because they were already teenagers, and then they were newly married. And so they didn't grow up in that house. They grew up in real poverty. Now, all of my grandparents, from my father's parents and my mother's parents, graduated at the same time from the same high school in Philadelphia. They were all in the same class.
You know the name of the high school?
The high school, no. But
It was a Jewish high school?
no, it wasn't a Jewish high
A
school.
public one?
A public school, poor people. What I do know is that my great-grandmother lived on Marston Street in Strawberry Mansion, and that school must have been around Strawberry Mansion because nobody had a car and nobody had a horse at that point, although ice was still being delivered by horse and wagon in Philadelphia. Trolley cars were new. They had the outhouse behind the house. So I remember those things. So my father's father married my mother's, oh wait a minute, my father's father married Frances Hoffman, and she was also in the high school. And she had two brothers, Alexander and Stanley. And I remember her mother. We called her Little Booba because she was a little lady. And she was always blind, as far as I knew. But maybe she just had bad cataracts. I once heard a story that she had eye surgery at a time when they removed the eye from the socket, did what they had to redo, put it back in the eye, and for 6 weeks you didn't sit up in the bed. So I don't know. I remember the house where she lived, that it had a gray porch with spindles, wooden spindles in front of it in Philadelphia. And she wore her hair twisted up in a knot. That I remember. Then my mother's parents, they were both born in America, whereas my father's father was one of those children that came from Leeds to Philadelphia. So my mother's parents were born in Philadelphia. And they were also in the same class. When I was going through all the papers after my parents died, I found letters written by the school teacher in Leeds to my grandfather, because it was holiday time and they maybe sent a card, but I found the entire letter. And so this was the beginning of the American family. Now, things were not so great in the United States. And we have to remember it was Depression, and then it was the beginning of the pre-Shoah. And when I asked my mother, did anybody help anybody? Did anybody take in anybody? She said no. All the aunts said that well, the uncle's out of work, this one is not well, that one doesn't have money, so they never even offered. I found the papers sent from Poland, written in Yiddish, asking somebody take the children, and all the names and the ID numbers. I found a copy of that letter. And nobody took anybody. Then there was a...
Do you know what happened to those children?
I have no idea.
Maybe they were killed in the Shoah.
They may have gone... Sadly, they probably were killed. Because none of them, as far as I know, survived. Now, my Boba, she was one of 16 children, and her husband was one of 18 children. And from what I know, that at least 6 of them and 8 of them didn't live through childhood. But where are all these other people, the ones that didn't get to America? I don't know. I just don't know. And I have searched lots of places, asking people questions. I did manage to connect with a cousin who now lives in Eshkar near Carmiel, and he grew up in Liverpool in England. And we know the story that when my Zeta came from Poland and arrived to Liverpool, he shared a bed with my cousin's grandfather, who maybe was 2 years old or 3 years old, until he was strong enough to go to work and move on in life. And so we have become very close. Now that boy's, my cousin Michael Levitt, his grandfather was in correspondence with my grandfather, Lou Miller, all the years of their life, from the time well, for sure from the time that my grandfather went back in 1956 to England to see where it was he lived, and to go and visit the school. From that time, they wrote religiously every month, detailed letters, because nobody used a telephone. And so I've become very close with this other cousin who lives now in Israel.
Sharyn, can I ask, did your grandparents or your parents ever speak about the family left in Poland?
They didn't even know anything. Never heard a word. Never.
Did they feel
They didn't tell me.
regretful that they didn't try to bring them over? Or?
They never said anything about it to me. What I know is that just around the time of Kristallnacht, my parents and my grandparents were, my father's parents and my parents were living, well, no, my parents weren't married yet. But my father was in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and they got a new rabbi. The rabbi came from Germany. And the rabbi, I believe, was Rabbi Schorsch, whose son became the head of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Well, Rabbi Schorsch came. He ordered that everybody be told to arrive to the synagogue, emergency meeting, and the doors were locked. And it was like on a yontif. Only once you walked in, you didn't go out. And my father said that he and his cousins, they were the bullies at the door. And the rabbi told them about Kristallnacht. And he told them that the only thing you can do to help is give money. And this was the beginning of United Jewish Appeal in this small town. And nobody left until he gave so much money that it hurt. The rabbi, he rejected the check. That's not enough. And that's what I know about from that town. Now, I do know that the one of my father's first cousins married a woman whose name was Marion, and that she was a child survivor. I don't know anything about her story. And nobody talked about it. When I was a child, nobody talked about the Shoah. I grew up in a town called Elmont, Long Island, and in 500 families in our synagogue, and then 500 across the road in the next synagogue. Well, I knew that this lady, they spoke German, and I gathered that they had come from Germany. but nobody told me any of the
Did
story.
you see any survivors with numbers on their arms?
No, never when I was a child. The only time I saw a survivor with a number was when I was waiting for a bus in Kiryat Anavim, I think, and I was sitting at the bus stop, and lo and behold, the person next to me had a number. Before that, I had never seen a number.
And Sharyn, when were you born? What date were you born?
I was born November 16, 1946, 76 years ago. And at that time, the Jewish community was beginning to grow and flourish. It was after the war, and my parents moved from small town at Pottstown, Pennsylvania, where I was born, to Elmont, Long Island. It was a place where had all been potato fields, and the little houses that we had were built probably around 1940, 41, because when the soldiers were going to come back from Europe, they needed where to live. And I do remember that my father said that his house payment was $69 a month, and that was a lot of money. And when he moved to the second house about 10 years later, and the payment was $129 a month, his friends thought he was really crazy. But in Elmont, we had a synagogue. I remember, as a little child, I'm going to tell you that it was Simchas Torah, and we had these paper flags, and on the top was a jelly apple. And we had what was called the dugout. What was a dugout? This was what was dug out to be the basement of the synagogue. Okay, these young people, they didn't have money to build the synagogue. They dug out a hole. They made it into their community, a synagogue, and that's where they started. So I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old when we first went there. And of course, the community grew and it flourished. And I was married in that synagogue. And
can I ask, did you,
Sure.
growing up, was your eyesight good?
My eyesight, from the age of 11, I had a pair of glasses.
But before that, it was fine.
Who knows? Maybe it wasn't fine, but nobody knew.
How did you know that you needed glasses at 11?
I think that, I started taking music lessons, piano lessons, and today I can tell you that I couldn't read the bloody music. Okay, I'm sitting here, and the piano is right in front of me, and probably I couldn't read it. That's why I was not good. And obviously, I didn't do well with numbers.
So at school, it must have been very difficult for you as well.
Well, today I'm going to tell you it was, but I didn't know that. And I got above average marks, but not the best. And I always had trouble with math. And today I'll tell you that I copied the numbers incorrectly, that I'm dyslexic with numbers, but nobody knew that. I might have the right answer for the numbers that I had, but that wasn't what the problem was. In high school, I always wore glasses. It was 1967 when I got my first contact lenses, but nobody told me that I had this eye problem. And so I continued.
Did you ever visit, or did you ever see a specialist, an eye specialist, or was it always an optician?
Well, it was an optician. The first time I saw a real specialist, well, let's fast forward.
Did you ever go to an ophthalmologist?
Well, when I lived in New Jersey, this was 1974, 75. In 74, I gave birth to my first son, and I lost all my vision. And what was the problem? I will tell you today that it was a birth control pill. Because 6 weeks after I had the baby, the doctor prescribed the pill. I took 1, maybe 2 pills, and my world became black. And I took to the bed, and it was a Sunday, and it was snowing, and where do you go for a doctor? And well, I thought to myself, one of my students, he must have a father who's a... So I called up, finally got the guy at home. He said, well, I want you to go to bed, stay there, and come to my office tomorrow, and I will look and see. Meanwhile, I called the obstetrician, and he said, don't take another birth control pill. Let's see what happens. And 24 hours later, my vision came back.
That must have been very frightening when your whole world turned black.
Yeah, and I had a new baby.
Could you see at all, or were you
I don't remember, but I'm saying the world turned black. So maybe it wasn't totally black, but I couldn't function.
That must be very frightening.
It was very frightening. And then I had a pair of glasses, and instead of my contact lenses, and I started to drive again and to do all my normal things and go back to teaching all my Hebrew school students and taking care of a baby. And that was 1974. In 1976, well, in 71 and 72, I lived in Jerusalem. I first came in 1966. I came as one of the summer students on a summer institute. And I have to remember that we slept on straw mattresses in a classroom in Seminar Beit HaKerem up on the 3rd floor. There were no Sherutim inside the building. You had to go...
No bathrooms.
No bathrooms. You had to go across the 3rd floor, down all the steps, down to where the gymnasium was. And I don't remember if it was an indoor gym or maybe it was, because there was a stage in there. Anyway, then they had showers and toilets. So probably for the kids after they were running the track or running the city.
And you came with your school?
I was a university student. I was the Hillel president at the State University of Albany in New York. And so this was supposed to be a group of Hillel presidents. We were 13 people from 13 different places, and we came. And in that time we were studying at Hebrew University in the morning. We were learning history and archaeology and all kinds of interesting things. And then we went in the afternoon for tiyulim. And there weren't very many buses around yet. Egged didn't have the buses we have today. We went in the back of open trucks. We had benches that came down, and if you were on the bench, well, there were no seat belts or anything. There maybe was a tarp overhead, and maybe not. And this way we would go out to see whatever it was we learned about in the morning. We traveled around the country. We spent our compulsory 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a kibbutz. I was in Mayim Baruch, which is up in the north where Syria and Lebanon and Israel come together. It was a very dangerous place, but we didn't know that. When we arrived, the whole kibbutz was trenched in. We're American kids. We don't know what trenches are. I'm afraid to jump in a swimming pool, jump in a trench. And we were 4 girls to a room, and you had to go out of the room and go across the grass to get to the bathroom in the shower. I remember that the water from the shower, there was a hole in the wall. and the water would go out, and it was a pipe so it would water the garden. Talk about recycling. Now when we arrived into our room the first day, on the pillow was a note that if the siren goes off, you run out, jump into the closest trench, and crawl until you get to the main safe place, which was underneath the Hadar Ochel. Now, luckily, we never had to do that while I was there. But sadly, like the week after I left there, Rami, who was our work leader, was killed one morning when he went out with the minesweeper. And we could have been killed if we had gone off to work.
And how old were you at this time?
Okay, 1966, so I was 20 years old.
Now this is before the 6-Day War.
Yeah.
Which was in 67.
Now, so this was in 66. And I left there, and I went back to Albany, to the university. And at this point, I knew I was going to live in Israel. I didn't understand what it was all about, but I was going to be here.
And Sharyn, can I just ask?
Sure, go ahead.
The unique situation that you saw Jerusalem when it was divided.
Okay, now I had a boyfriend when he came from the kibbutz down to Jerusalem. Where do you go for a walk? From Beit Karen. We got to the main post office on Jaffa Road, and barbed wire every place, and you can't. No Mamilla. I mean, it was called Mamilla, but it was no man's land, and there was barbed wire all the way around. And
could you see the Jordanian soldiers? Or
I don't remember about that, but I do know that in 1971, I moved to Jerusalem. I was married, and we came to go to Hebrew Union College. My first husband, Michael, was going to study to be a rabbi, and it was my idea. Okay. We lived down on Rehov Ben Sira, which is at the bottom of Shlom Zion Hamalka and King David, Little Street. We lived in an old Arab house. It was big, okay? I mean, the rooms were huge. It was cold. It was charming. We had those Armenian floors. That house itself originally didn't have walls in it and didn't have a bathroom in it because you could see where the walls were put up. They didn't follow the patterns in the floor. Now, we didn't live too far from Hebrew Union College, and so our house became a hangout for all the students. And my first big project was, well, we're all here, where are we going to break the fast? So I got a hold of the dean's wife. His name was Ezra Spicehandler. And his wife, she looked at me like, are you crazy? What? I said, well, we have to have a break of fast. Well, now we need to do it in a kosher kitchen. But we didn't have a kitchen at the college yet. She came to my house and a few other people, and how many eggs did we boil, and how much tuna fish did we make? And we catered this thing at the college. And then the students started to come to my house for Shabbat dinner. So I said, the first time you come, you are a visitor. Second time, you're the family. You work and you contribute. And so there was one guy who went with me every Friday morning to Mamilla, where Cafe Ne'eman, but in those days it was just the Ne'eman Bakery, had its industrial bakery. And they would bring out these huge trays of cake. And you would say, I want a piece of apple cake. And so you'd go like this, and then the lady would cut it more or less to what you showed her, weigh it, put it in a piece of paper, and you would take it home. Then we had also, so one student went with me to the bakery, and he had to pay for whatever was chosen at the bakery. And I had another one that went with me on Thursdays there was a butcher on Rav Cook Street. So these boys wanted, they wanted brust, like whatever that they wanted, like their mothers would cook. They would go with me to the butcher. They would pay for the meat. Whatever was, and then I would bring it home and I would cook. I went to the supermarket on Agrone Street. That was the only supermarket around. And then there was one in the bottom of the old Hamashpir. But I remember the story that the year before, this must have been must have been in 1971, maybe in May, because we came at the end of June. My brother-in-law, who had been a student at Hebrew Union College, had been in the supermarket, and he walked out, and boom!
There was a bomb, terrorist bomb attack.
And the bomb was in a crate of oranges. I remember that story.
It was a South African. One of the casualties that was killed was a South African, and they had the memorial plaque outside the supermarket.
Well, it was. I think that I didn't go to the shuk in those days. I don't remember going in 1971 or 72 to the shuk. It's not in my memories. I would go to the Super Soul, and I would have a mishloach, because we had a lot of steps.
Somebody would send. They would.
And I didn't know anything about any mishloachim. Being an American girl, and I had just moved from Norfolk, Virginia, to Jerusalem, and
And how was your Hebrew? Were you fluent in Hebrew?
Well, no. I had been teaching Hebrew in Norfolk, Virginia, and but my Hebrew was alapanim.
It's not so great.
And so I went to Hebrew Union College. They said that if a guy was married or a girl was married, well, we didn't have any married women in the class, but we did have two women. The spouse could go for free. So on day one, I started going to school full time. Now, one thing that I always caution people, do not do very well on the entrance exam, because I placed over here. They put me on level 5, but I didn't know any grammar. I had some vocabulary, but by the time that they agreed to move me down a class, I missed what I needed. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I went to the Ulpan in Hebrew Union College. They sent us, not all of us, but I went out as a volunteer in Nachlaot. And they sent me as a social worker, and I was supposed to teach the women about birth control, because I was a married woman and I didn't have any children. But you can't exactly walk down the street and say, here, I'm going to tell you about taking a pill, and this is a condom, and you can't do that. So I started they sent me to one family, and it was a single mother with 2 children and the grandmother. They were living in one room on, what's the name of the street? Right down at the bottom of Nachlaot. I'll remember it in a minute.
It's near Machne Yehuda, near the...
No, well, not. It was the other side of Bezalel. Okay, now, these people were basically living in hovels. The place is still there. The same people are still there today. Now, they were well-to-do. Why were they well-to-do? Because she had a mirpeset and it was closed. And she had a toilet there with a pull chain that was the only place I've ever been where you had to sit on the toilet to take a shower. And no neighbors had the toilet or a shower. So the neighbors would come to... this lady, she spoke 3 languages, but she couldn't read or write in any language, even today. She doesn't read or write. Very beautiful, attractive lady with 2 small kids. I used to do their homework with them, and the grandmother would sit on the doorstep with a big magash in front of her, and she was going through all the pieces of rice to take out the black ones, because that was pasul. When I visited in 1989, the same family, the boy said to me, oh boy, he was a man. And then the last time I saw him, he was 50 years old. But he said to me, you left me and I got into trouble. He said, and he got into drugs and all kind of other things, and the father didn't want anything to do with these children because they were poisonous for his other children. And, but he said to me, you left me. And the girl reminded me that she learned to play the piano in my house because my husband played the piano. We rented a piano for all of $10 a month. And it was schlepped up the steps on the back of this Arab. It is upright piano and 2 guys pushing him up from behind. And they remembered that. And when it was Pesach, the mother sent the girl, she was all of 8 years old, supervised me cleaning for Pesach. Okay? Well, she took apart the stove. We had a kirayim, and we didn't have any oven, and we had the same model GE refrigerator that my grandmother had in 1950. Maybe she had it before that, with a tiny little ice box. It took 4 of us with master's degrees to put the kirayim back in working order. Now, if that wasn't enough for Pesach, that night, when we were now ready to eat something after all the big house cleaning, and we couldn't take a shower or a bath because these people believed that you had to put all the glassware in the bathtub and change the water every night for 3 nights or something to kasher the things. So now we can't take a shower or anything. And we sit down in the kitchen, scrambled eggs, and my friend says to me, I smell smoke. Smoke? Wait, the house is stone, the floors are stone, the walls are stone. Well, how can that? As she went towards the bathroom, she started to scream. The house is getting full of smoke. And we were the only ones on all the area up and down Shlomtzi and Hamalka. We were the only ones with the telephone. We didn't have the words to use on the telephone, but we had the telephone. Why? Because a doctor once rented that apartment, and the telephone line remained in the apartment, and the number remained there. And for when we paid the bill, it was in the name of 10 people before us, you know. And I'm calling, and I'm saying, Yesh babayit, Eish babayit, Midura babayit. You know, I didn't have...
There's a fire in the home, yeah?
Yeah. So then we went to get the neighbors out. Next to us was a lady, we never talked to her, but she was a survivor. And so she was standing on her little bit of a mirpaset overlooking Shlomtsi and Hamaka, and there are flames coming up underneath her legs, and she won't move. She doesn't get it. The boys tried to talk to her in German. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak French. We couldn't communicate with her in Hebrew to tell her, we gotta get out. Come on, we're gonna take you down the steps. So eventually we're out in the street, and the fire engines come, and they're looking for a hydrant. Where are there fire hydrants in old Jerusalem? No fire hydrants. So it turned out, and now there's no electricity because the electric wires ran straight up the walls, okay? And so if they caught fire, no power. All right. Now there's no power in the whole building, or the next door building, or the one after. And we're out in the street, and it's dark. And all those nice nightclubs and things that are next to Shlomtsi and Lamalka didn't exist. With old Arab-style housing like we had. Jabotinsky lived opposite us years before us in the corner house. And so they from the light of the fire engines, they're crawling around in the street, and they finally find something to open because to get into the water pipe under the street to put this fire out.
How did the fire start?
Okay, we lived up above a makolet. Next to the makolet is an art shop, was an art store in those days with the oil paints and all that kind of stuff in it. Today they sell a lot of Armenian stuff.
Pottery and...
tables and all kinds of mosaic things. Well, evidently the fire started there. But because it was the night before Pesach, I mean, that guy didn't have to stay there to clean anymore. He went home. But the guy in the makolet was still there because he had to change everything before he could sell us anything in the morning. And so he started throwing milk bottles. Now in those days, milk came in half-liter glass bottles. So he started throwing milk bottles through the window to let the smoke out. And meanwhile, the flames are coming out and they're going up underneath the mirpaset, and the lady is standing there. So we remember all of that. And then in the morning we get a message that the uncle whose house we were supposed to go to, now he was my husband's grandmother's brother, and his wife had invited us to come to the Seder. And they were gathering all the American kids, whoever was in Jerusalem. We get a message that he's been rushed to the Hadassah, and no Seder. But if you want to come around and collect some food, meanwhile, we have no electricity. Of course, we have no water, because the bathtub was filled with this dirty water from all these glasses, and we can't warm the water. And I'm suddenly making a Seder. I've never made a Seder in my life. We're making a Seder. And so we were students. We had 2 sawhorses, a big piece of wood. We put it on top, and we covered it with bedsheet. Now, we did that for Shabbatot. So suddenly we're making a Seder on our 2-burner Kirayan, and we had not done all the shopping for that, but we made this Seder, and we had a full house of guests.
And what happened to that lady, the survivor, who didn't want to budge? Was she saved?
Yeah, she was saved. I don't know if they carried her down or what.
She was saved.
Yeah, but she was paralyzed. In as much as she said, I was in the ghetto and I was in the camp, and if it's my time, it's my time. Look at the trauma. Look at the trauma. All those years later.
And Sharyn, did your husband, did he get his rabbinate?
Oh yes, he's now a retired rabbi and lives in North Carolina. He was ordained in 1976, and then we came directly the very next day back to Israel, and we spent the summer in Haifa with our little boy Joshua, and stayed with our friends Lee and Madeline Weatherhorn. And we went, I remember that summer we went camping in Mivaseret. Now there were campgrounds in Mivaseret. Today, of course, it's all housing.
Yeah.
But we went camping, but we got there, we came to Jerusalem with our friends, and they had 3 little ones, and we had 1, and we put all the kids in the back of the Volvo station wagon, and we came to Jerusalem. It was Entebbe Day. Now, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the clock radio went on.
77. I think 76 or 77.
This was 76.
76, yeah.
July 4th, 1976.
76.
And we were there at 7 o'clock in the morning, the clock radio goes on in the English news. I never listened to anything in English nowadays. And we hear that our guys are on their way back from Entebbe. We didn't even know they went. When we went to sleep at night, nobody knew anything. All the preparations were in secret. And they practiced in secret before they took off. Well, everybody in the building in Haifa knew somebody who was on that plane.
There was the Air France plane that was hijacked and then was taken to Entebbe with Idi Amin.
Yes.
There's a story.
Okay. Now, so now the Americans and Canadians are making a big celebration for July 4th at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And there was no Mount Scopus campus yet. Anyway, so we are out there. We promised the kids we're going to make a little bonfire, going to give them hot dogs. There's no wood to burn. Anyway, we get to Jerusalem, and now we get the news that Yoni Netanyahu was killed. We didn't get the news yet because Bibi got a message from his brother Ido, but Bibi was living in Boston, and he got in the car and drove to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where his father was in the faculty, to tell his parents.
His father was a very renowned
professor
of history, Jewish history.
And then the news was released. So that was quite a day. After the fact, once I was back in New York, I saw a cousin who lived in New Jersey who told me that her sister and her brother-in-law and their little boy were on that plane, and her sister, who wasn't Jewish, was taken off the plane because they separated the women and the men, and then anybody who wasn't Jewish, and then there was in the negotiations, they took them out, and they were taken to France, and I believe, and the Israelis were there to interrogate them to find out exactly what's going on the ground. And being that she was a very brilliant woman, she was very helpful to them. But she was separated from her Jewish husband. And after that, she converted.
She converted, wow. There was also, I don't know if you remember, Mrs. Bloch, who was taken to the hospital in Kampala, and unfortunately she was killed in revenge. It was a very, very sad what happened afterwards.
So we've lived through all these pieces of history. And that's what, this is my Candlestick Trail.
So
what I have been through.
You showcase your whole history in this book.
Yeah. What I have been through. I mean, I don't know.
Can you show some of the artwork that you did? Because it's also very interesting that you managed to, you're very gifted in art.
I never did art work until when I lived in Ohio in 1976. When we came back from Haifa, we went to Ohio, to Warren, Ohio, to a small congregation. And I went to work in a summer camp, the Olin Sang Ruby Union Institute summer camp in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. My grandchildren go there. My children went there. And I was also in the faculty with my husband over there. So in those days, I learned to sculpt in sand. And I think I have a picture here of a sculpture I did there in sand. Well, we will find it. Anyway, when I came back to Ohio, I started to take sculpture lessons. But many years later, because of my eyes, I started to paint. And this is the rockets. It's Gaza. Gaza. And you see, if you look carefully, you see children, you see faces, sad faces on the buildings.
It's very special. And this is, I mean, you paint.
I paint.
You paint what you see, what you've experienced.
Okay, here.
It's not abstract, it's...
Here we have, on the top, terrorists and barbed wire. Here you see the barbed wire. These are the terrorists around it.
And you have the tunnels.
Yes, and I built, and these
Gaza.
are the tunnels from Gaza. Now what do you see here? Look really carefully. You see the playground? You see the kindergarten? You see the buildings are all sad?
Yeah.
Okay? This is real, what we have lived through in this country. Think about all those families that got evacuated out.
Yeah.
Up here, we told you that we were coming. We dropped the messages, and people didn't go. We told them we were coming to Gaza.
We warned, yeah.
Gaza is under fire. You know, it was dark, all that smoke. It was real. Over here, something brighter. The earth opens up. What is that, Korach? I can't see.
And his band falls in. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, and all the men fall in. And this is rebirth. like Shavuot.
Oh, it's very special.
Shavuot.
Sharyn, you're very gifted. And you love it. You have a passion for painting.
Oh, yeah. Now these are pictures about Pesach. You can see that
Opening of the Red Sea.
Yeah, opening the Red Sea, yeah.
And it's the
What does it say?
Exodus from Sharyn, from Egypt. Exodus from Egypt. And with the confusion when we left Egypt. You've captured it incredibly well in your paintings.
You know, it's incredible. Now, I worked with stone for many, many years, but because of my eyes, I felt I had to give it up. And then I ruined my hand. And
it's difficult.
With a hammer and chisel, it was hard. Now, I have painted about, here, look carefully in the tree. What do you see? Is there a tree house? You see what's in blue? That is our Corona monster.
Wow.
Corona monster is in the neighborhood.
Gee, that's incredible.
We got trouble.
Wow, Sharyn, that's amazing.
We also have so where do I go? I've been involved with all kinds of things. I was known as the mitzvah lady when I lived in Canada, and I decided, here's a piece of the sculpture.
And that you chiseled out yourself.
Yeah.
It's amazing, the image of a face.
Yes, and if you look really carefully, you will see the tears.
Yeah, you can see. You can see the tears. Yeah.
Yeah. When I moved to Canada in 1981, we moved to Montreal because my first husband got a job there. And we went to a small synagogue. And what we learned quickly was that the word Reform Judaism was dirt. We came to the community and the Orthodox rabbi didn't even welcome us. Didn't even come over and say hello. Didn't invite the new rabbi to come for lunch. Nothing. 5 years later, when I got divorced, I invited this man into my office at the Jewish Education Council, and I told him, you know, I said, I'm sure that you heard, it's not exactly a secret that the rabbi has left. I said, and I need to send my kids to Hebrew school, and I need to have a bar mitzvah in January, and this was already September, but the rabbi had just left like the week before. And I said, and I need a job. So he came through and gave me a job in the afternoon school, and he said, okay, so bring your kids, and that's that, and whatever you want. In the end, the bar mitzvah was in Temple Emmanuel, which was a big ultra Reform congregation in Montreal, and we were the second Reform congregation in our community. Today that doesn't exist.
Did people move out, or was there a lot of intermarriage?
Well, there were a lot of changes. When the rabbi left, the next rabbi was not exactly a wonderful guy, and they had to pay him to get out.
Right.
Meanwhile, the conservative movement hired somebody, and they started a congregation in the neighborhood. And it sadly died because of economics, because people left Montreal to Toronto and to Winnipeg and Edmonton because of the French.
Yeah. It was a big
A
migration.
big balagan. And so the community basically had one synagogue. But I'm happy to say that the nice building that we had built, the Jewish love and money and hands put together, became the Sephardic community. Because the nature of the immigration pattern, we got a lot of Moroccan and Israeli Jews who came to live in Montreal because they spoke French, and therefore they were accepted because there's a point system. And so eventually they took over the building so that it is still Jewish property, and there's the Yahrzeit list and things like that are still there.
But Sharyn, you grew up in an Orthodox upbringing.
No, no. I grew up in a Reform synagogue, a Reform liberal congregation.
But your grandparents, I mean your grandmother lit Shabbos candles.
My mother did. So that didn't mean that by the standards of my grandsons today.
Yeah.
What is this? I was in shock the other night when my one grandson, who just finished the army, who's in yeshiva, said to me, "He's not Jewish." And I said, "What do you mean he's not Jewish?" Referring to my grandson in Boston. His mother, how was she converted? I said, "Well, his mother is a rabbi. His mother was converted twice. But who did the conversion? No way, Jose, can I make him comprehend that she knows more than any 10 of us put together, because she learned because she wanted to learn, not because somebody told her to go and learn." And,
But Sharyn, can I just ask, your family that came from Poland, originally when they came to America, they were Orthodox?
I don't know. My grandfather, I don't know if my grandfather had a bar mitzvah. My father didn't have a bar mitzvah until I twinned him with my younger son in Montreal. We said enough is enough, and he had a bar mitzvah. Now, he didn't have a bar mitzvah ostensibly because there was no money. It was depression. And my grandmother said how, it was Rosh Hashanah, and I was so depressed I couldn't buy new clothes. And the rabbi's wife said to me, "Fan, get yourself a hat. It's okay." And so there was no money for lessons, and there was no money for celebrations and all of that. And my grandmothers, well, they always lit Shabbos candles as far as I know. My father's parents, I remember that when the 70th anniversary, I guess it was the 70th anniversary, we went to California. They were married on Christmas. And so we went to California, and we were having a celebration in the synagogue. And I remember my mother whispered, don't eat, there's not enough food to go around," because so many people had come. And so I know that they were involved, but I don't know what they were involved in. Which brings me to another segment. I am part of a multi-generational Hadassah family. Now, Hadassah has different kind of life membership pins, at least they used to. And I had one with my grandmothers, my mother, and me. Now, I had one grandmother who wrote checks, and she went to luncheons. And the other grandmother who bought Hadassah certificates and would send in honor of the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, the birthday, whatever. And in those days, $5 was a big gift. And I have certificates still for my bat mitzvah. And, somebody who gave $5
was a lot.
That was a lot of money in 1958, 59. Then my mother was Hadassah president when I was 3 years old, maybe. And they used to have meetings in our house because the dugout wasn't dug out yet. And she didn't drive. She didn't have a car yet. And she had babies. And the ladies would come to our house for the meetings. And when there was a convention and they wanted her to be able to go, Aunt Dora and Jim Glassman never had any children. They were in the group that got here before. And Uncle Jim's brother, he was the leader of the uprising in Vilna Ghetto. Mm-hmm. And we know what happened. There was not very many people left to tell you about it. And by the by, one evening when this study group that my parents were a member of, they were meeting, a man came, and in the conversation he asked Jim, "What's your name?" And Jim told him, "Jim Glassman, and from Vilna." And the man says, Your brother, I think maybe he was married. I don't know if he had children, but I was there in the ghetto with him. All these years we looked, we haven't found them. But who knows where. So Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Dora would come and stay with us when my mother needed to go to a convention. Fast forward, my mother was Hadassah president again. When I went to live in Norfolk, Virginia, they asked me to be the Hadassah president, but I was straight out of graduate school. And what did I know about Hadassah? Except that in my dream box, I wanted to work for National Hadassah in New York. Now, in 1976, I went to Mount Scopus for the first time, because now it was open. And I brought little Joshua, and they were inaugurating the burn unit. Big take-us outside the hospital, outdoors. And they brought all these kids in wheelchairs and in hospital pajamas. And for maybe 40 years, I had the hat that they gave Joshua to put on his head that day. Now, I still didn't understand what they did in there. Okay, so now with our visit to Mount Scopus, I come back, we moved to Ohio, and immediately I become the Hadassah president. I had been Hadassah president when I lived in New Jersey, and now I had more of an understanding what is going on in Hadassah. I saw the Hadassah supplies, that these kids were wearing the pajamas and the hats, and I came back to my community in Warren, Ohio, and I explained, we need to give money to buy this, and to this, and to this. And by the way, I found the certificate from 1938 that was bought in memory of my grandmother's mother. They bought a bed in her name in Mount Scopus, with the days when there was no Ein Kerem, and her name is still there in Hadassah. And you know, what can I tell you? I can go on and on about Hadassah. Hadassah really, really, really was a drawing point for me to get me here. I always thought I was going to work for them. Well, they lost me to the Israel consulate. But I knew when I went to the University of Wisconsin in 1967, because my father wasn't paying for a ticket to come back during and after a war. When I got to the campus and I saw that there were Jewish people there, but most of the students that I met that summer had never seen a Jewish person and did not know that there was a war that's over 2 weeks ago, and they didn't know where Israel was on the globe. That's when I knew what my work was going to be. And so my life work has brought me on the Candelstick Trail.
And you've come to live in Israel.
And I've been in Israel for 25 years. And yes, I do speak Hebrew. And yes, I do speak pretty well.
Sharyn, I just want to thank you, and so I am so grateful. So Sharyn, I'm extremely grateful to you, and you've been a patient for many, many years, since you came.
25 years.
And your dear husband, Dennis, he's
a survivor.
Not only is he a survivor, he's from the Kastner train, and I actually interviewed him when he was still before the Alzheimer's or when he was first starting. And I've known his family, and I'm so connected to our neighbors, the Howards.
It's all our family.
It's all family. So we've known each other many, many years. But hearing your story, and I highly recommend this book to everybody. And this is your journey.
Yes.
And this is your journey that brought you to Israel. And
it's available if you want to contact me at SharynMiller46@gmail.com.
We'll put this in the description under the video. And Sharyn, I'm so grateful to you, and this has been such an honor and a privilege. And if you could just leave us with a message, what message do you impart to your grandchildren, to the future generations?
I'm very, very saddened with what's situation in America. As one of my sons says, they live Jewish, but they don't live Jewish by Israeli connotation of Jewish. My other son is very much a member of the world. And I think it was caused by the corona. And people are not going back to the synagogue, and they're not going back to community activities the way that they grew up. And my grandchildren in America, I don't know. I can only say that the oldest one in Boston called me one night and said, "Grandma, can I come?" And I said, "Tell me when. I'll go to the airport and get you." So he's coming for a couple of weeks in February as part of the exchange program with the reality school in Haifa, and kids from that school were just in Boston. So the hope is that we can reconnect, because I am the grandma in the middle. I'm the one who ran away from home, left my home in Montreal. But again, my children didn't stay there. One son made his life in Boston, and one is in Portland, Oregon. They each have a family. Yes, they have candlesticks. And yes, they have Hanukkot. But how come they're not here?
Well, Sharyn, you are the trailblazer. You are here, and you are an inspiration, and please God, they will follow in your footsteps. And I really want to thank you, and please God, you should just have nachas and mazel and bracha and very good eyesight, because you have an incredible insight into not only Jewish history, but you've lived so much and you've seen so much, and we are very grateful to you, and your grandchildren and the future generations are as well.
And the grandchildren here, hopefully they are finally finding out who their Savta is, because they never called me Savta. They always call me Sharyn. And that's probably because their mom and dad always call me Sharyn. And, I'm Yisrael Chai.
Wonderful. Sharyn, thank you so much.